Okay, welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. George, it's been a little while. We're recording this on New Year's Day. So it's been a while since we've been on the show together. How have you been?
Good, good. It's nice to talk to you again. I pulled up our chat and it said it's 2 months since the last time we recorded together. So it's been a while, and I'm glad that you're back and the audience will hear your voice again. I think we all missed it.
No, man, it's amazing what you've done in the last couple months with the Accelerator launching and kind of everything that's been set up. We've had way more both attention and success than I could have hoped for with the Accelerator. I had someone, where was it? It was yesterday at church. Someone was like, "Yeah, my friend just bought a course from you. Do you know what that's about?" I just started laughing. So that was kind of cool. But
Oh, that's funny.
how's your new year shaping up to be so far? Day one.
So far, so good. I'm excited. 2018 is going to be a big year for me. And so I'm looking forward to it, and for everything that, both with the podcast and personally. So I've been really looking forward to 2018, and I'm glad it's finally here.
That's awesome. Double graduation and practice to buy. You've got a lot to look forward to. So getting into the interview, this is an interview that we did a long time ago that you did, kind of one of your first interviews that you did when you first came on the podcast. And it's someone that I actually attempted to interview, and we had technical difficulties, and the interview didn't end up working out. But it's a personal favorite of mine and a fan favorite for a lot of people, Sandy Pardue. So why did you want to bring Sandy on the show?
Well, Sandy, I think, offers a lot of great insight, and she's a practice consultant on Dentaltown, and that's where I really got to know Sandy, by reading a lot of her posts on Dentaltown. And she doesn't typically talk about acquisitions or transitioning into ownership, but I think the season's going to kind of take a turn here, and we're going to start talking about acquisitions, and so, or transitions. And so I think I wanted to get her take on that and really get her in a situation that I haven't really seen her in the process of buying and acquiring a practice, and see what she recommends. And so that's why I was excited to do this interview, and I think it came out really good.
Awesome. Okay, here we go with Sandy Pardue.
I'm very excited to have with me today Sandy Pardue. Sandy, for those of you who don't know, and you should, is a big consultant on Dentaltown. She's posting all the time, and she just has a lot of insight on a lot of different topics. Today, we're really going to talk about team-related issues and systems in the practice. And at this point in our journey, we've kind of acquired a practice, and we've entered the practice, and now Sandy's really going to guide us through how you handle the team and how you start to implement some systems. So Sandy, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic. I'm really excited to be with you here.
We really appreciate you coming on. You have so many things that you could introduce yourself as, so why don't you just go ahead and tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your seminars, and your consulting?
Okay. Well, I'm Sandy Pardue. I am Director of Consulting with Classic Practice Resources in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I've been consulting over 25 years now, and I've been helping practices all the way, into the early 90s. And it's just been fantastic because I've been able to take young dentists that's been practicing 20 years, and even the dentists that are getting ready to retire, and take their practices to a place that they really never imagined. And I've worked with a lot of very popular people on Dentaltown that have now started with their own seminars and their own consulting. So that's really exciting, and it's been very rewarding to me. No one's ever gotten worse, okay, because they got help. So every practice can improve, and no practice is reaching its potential. So I'd like to start like that.
And for those of you who don't know, Sandy did work with Scott Leune. I believe that's who you're referencing as one of those people.
Yeah, there's a few of them actually that I'm very proud of, but I did work with Scott.
Yeah, he's definitely a big influence nowadays on Dentaltown, and you helped him out in his early days.
Yeah, we were his consultant. He was actually on our 1-year program. So I remember when he first called me. I knew at that point, that very first phone call, I remember even where I was sitting when I took the call from Scott Leune. And he had been in his practice, I think it was his second year. And he said, "Sandy, I want systems. I know that's what I need. I need organization and systems." And we just went from there. And he was very unique, and he's proven to be very unique.
Yeah, I think unique is a good word to describe Scott. So let's our viewers, or our listeners here, let me just kind of introduce you to them. Most of them are pre-owners, and they're in the process of either acquiring a practice or starting a practice. Right now, we're talking about an acquisition. And so For our listeners who have acquired a practice at this point and they enter it, how do you recommend approaching the team?
Okay, well, this is the thing about the team. Most new owners are really excited about having long-term staff. They'll call me. I hear it all the time. It's like, Sandy, I'm starting to my own practice. I'm purchasing a practice. I'm going to get in there, and oh, I'm just so excited. There's 2 front office staff. They've both been there over 25 years, an assistant of 25 years, and I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, because they're really excited about that. But there are a lot of problems that come with that. So I don't want the listeners to think, well, maybe I shouldn't get a practice with long-term staff. No, yeah, go ahead, do it. But my message here is don't count on them helping you a lot. Don't count on them being there for a long time after you take over. They tend to have fixed ideas about the practice and the way it was done before, and many times they have not been exposed to what's current in dentistry, current systems, current software, computer programs that have been within those 4 walls and just haven't been exposed. And so you go in and they don't want to change. People don't like change anyway. So I want to make sure the message here is find the practice, focus on what you're going to do with your own goals and your own ideas when you take over, and don't focus on those existing staff, and don't be afraid to lose them. And that's huge. It's like, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard dentists say, if that hygienist leaves, all the patients are going to leave. It's not true. I can't think of a time it's ever happened out of hundreds of practices that people I've heard of or worked with. It's like it doesn't happen. You go in, make the practice your own. Some staff will stay, some will go. Patients will not leave because of that. You may lose just a handful, but it's going to be okay.
So at what point would you say in the transition would you start making the practice your own?
I think you should go right in and do it. You go in, when I say that, you go in as the leader. And that's another thing that really is lacking, is that leadership role. So a lot of times the new doctor comes in and they're almost afraid of the staff, if that makes sense. They don't want to rock the boat. Well, the first thing you want to do when you go into anything new, I don't care if it's in a dental office or anything in life, is you want to find out what made that office successful, right? It's like, find out the things that were working really well. And at the same time, you're being the leader. You're letting the staff know this is now your practice and you're taking over. So you're friendly, of course, but you don't want to be their friend, if that makes sense. So you're the leader. You're going to let them know what your goals are. You're going to let them know that you appreciate them, that you want to hear their ideas, because you can't go in and say, oh, no, we're not doing it like that. We're not doing it like that. So the first week or two, you're learning a lot about the practice. Then from there, that's a great time. If you've ever thought about a consultant, it's a good time to get the consultant in, because they know that the new dentist is there, and the new dentist is friendly, but you can tell they're in that leadership role, and they're going to have new, fresh ideas to bring in. No one likes change.
So would you bring in the consultant early on in the transition then?
It's a good idea. Because you don't want things because what happens is the new dentist comes into the practice, learning how things were done, maybe with a few ideas, you get settled in, and then you bring a consultant in 6 months later, a year later, and now there's more change.
Oh, so you're saying while we're changing things, we might as well change them correctly using the help of a consultant.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And I've heard people, some guys, they come in and they fire everybody and they re-interview them. Other people, they tell everybody your jobs are safe for 6 months or a year or whatever. How do you recommend telling the staff what their current situation is when you come into practice?
Well, I think you really don't know. I think first the staff are afraid. Staff are scared. Okay. They're unsure. And I think the best thing to do is to come in and put your feelers out, so to speak, like get to know the staff. And when you start to get organized, And I'm just a big cheerleader for statistics and practice monitors. So one of the first things you do is that as you get organized is you start giving them individual monitors, so to speak. Okay, they have monitors that track their work. You'll soon know in a very short period who you want to keep and who needs to be replaced.
Can you give us some examples of some of those monitors that you would on each staff member, like a position, what you would have them?
Sure. For instance, let's just say, and some of the listeners they're going to really be able to relate to this because they're going to say, oh yeah, that sounds just like my practice. So I just bought it. I go in and there's two people up front. One is the receptionist, supposedly, one's the scheduler, or maybe they're sharing all their duties. That's what we see the most. It's like they're helping each other. So there's no accountability. Okay, so one day one will verify insurance, another day somebody will do the deposit. It's never the same. We want it consistent. So if there's two people up front, we want one to be the receptionist, scheduler, and one to be the financial coordinator, insurance. Okay, you put like things together is the first step to organizing anything. You put like things together. And the receptionist, scheduler, and financial and insurance go together. Okay, so that's separated. Now they need a checklist. They need a checklist that lists out what's expected of them on a daily basis. And so you list out everything that needs to be done by each one of those ladies. Now that you have that, and let's just use the scheduler receptionist position for an example. So as that person, she's responsible for new patients. Why? She's the first person patients talk to when they call. She is the person that's answering the phone most of the time, even though the other person would back her up. So she's tracking new patients. She's sending out welcome letters and thank you letters and no cavity letters to children, and she's tracking patients that are getting married or pregnant, or so she can send cards or sympathy cards. So she's tracking all these things. And now you know what she's doing. She's also responsible for the schedule. So she's tracking the percentage of time filled, the production for each provider. She's tracking the number of broken appointments. She knows what's going on in the practice as far as the schedule is concerned. And now you can tell if she's doing a good job. Without that, how do you really know?
So then the key to monitoring them is really giving them a very specific set of, duties and then monitoring those specific things.
Yes, you have them track them. Like, for instance, for the financial coordinator, you give her a goal. We want to collect 98% of adjusted production. So she's tracking that and reporting it to you. Okay, you're not having to go find it. She's giving it to you at the time that you're asking. Generally, it's at a staff meeting. So she brings that. And so you're looking at 90 days past due. She's tracking that for you. She's looking at the past due insurance claims. She's tracking all these things and accountable for them. But when you have two people up front and they're sharing duties, there's no way to track this. I mean, you can track it, but you don't know who's pulling the weight.
So Sandy, would you actually base your duties off of an ideal model, like something you would teach in a seminar? Or would you spend some time in the specific practice before the closing, if you can, and feel the specific office and then make those duties accordingly?
Well, I would find I know that in every practice you need to have these things. They're all done in every practice. I don't care what the model is. If it's pedo, Medicaid, whatever it is, these things are done in every one of those practices. But you bring up an interesting point. You want to find the person that is the strongest for that position. So one of them will be your best scheduler. One will be the one that doesn't mind making collection calls or asking for payment. And that's what you want to determine in advance.
Okay, so in terms of going into the practice, now we've given the staff things to monitor. Do you have any other advice on initial things to handle the team?
Well, when you go in at first, you really don't know. So it takes a little bit of time. So you'll know in 2 or 3 weeks if those personalities are going to work out, or if they're defiant, or maybe they're not coming to work, or you just don't like their personality. You're going to find out a lot. So with the team, you're meeting with them. You need to make sure that you're setting up regular meetings. If it's not morning huddles, it's at least every 2 weeks as some sort of staff meeting. Staying in good communication with them, being easy to access. And I think you'll be able to tell a lot about them. It's unfortunate we don't have a crystal ball and we don't really know until we get in there. But I do know one thing. The first thing that they need to do, that this new doctor needs to do, is establish those systems and duties and those monitors on those staff.
I really like what you said about the monitors. And kind of going back to what you were talking about not being afraid to lose staff. For me, I'm looking at an opportunity, and the office manager is kind of in flux in this specific practice. And I'm a little worried, honestly, about that office manager not having them initially coming into the practice. So can you kind of go through maybe the positions that, like, I know a hygienist or an office manager to me seem like the ones that somebody would be most fearful about. Can you kind of go through some things that we should be concerned about and how we would handle an early departure of a staff member?
Okay. Now, let me just say this. One mistake I think that people make is calling a front desk person an office manager. Okay. First off, you do not do that. Okay. That person could be the front office manager, but as you move through the office and growing and expanding, I think that the best model is to have someone over each area. And I'm sure of that. Let's say, as you grow, you're adding staff. It's good to have someone over the front desk, one head assistant, one head hygienist. It's easier to manage because one person can typically manage 5 people easily. So when you come in and, again, people need to know. They must know what you expect from them. So you go in and there's an office manager. And oftentimes the office manager doesn't really want to share everything about the practice with the new owner. A lot of times, they'll hold back a bit. So I recommend to all practice owners to really get to know your own software and, again, make them accountable.
Why would they hold back?
Well, it's unfortunate, but there's a large percentage of embezzlement in practices. And the longer someone works there, the more likely they maybe could steal. I mean, the embezzlement is at 40% in practices per the American Dental Association. So, I mean, it's a real problem. So, that could be one reason. That doesn't mean every person that's been in an office for 25 years is stealing, but there are different reasons. A lot of times I have heard them say or confide in their consultant that they feel like or make a sassy remark that it's job security.
Okay.
Job security to not tell everything. They want the new doctor to come in and have to ask the questions.
Okay, so then how would you recommend kind of dealing with that?
Well, again, knowledge is power. That new doc going in there needs to know the software. That's one of the first things that the doctor should do. They find out they're buying a practice. They have a start date. They know that it's open dental. They are studying open dental. So they know, they understand that software. They're thinking about, what are my systems going to be? How are we going to confirm patients? Are we going to use a third party for that? What are my systems? And part of that leadership is going in and getting with that person and coming up with these systematic recipes and training that person on that way to do it.
Okay, so you would do a systematic recipe then for every component of the practice.
Yeah, there's about 42 of those vital systems.
Okay, and then which ones would you start with?
Well, the heart of the practice is the front office. I've never met a dentist or a hygienist or a dental assistant that wasn't willing to take a patient if it was there for them. So your most vital area is your front office. It's the heart. Okay, it's the heart of the practice. If you don't have that up and running, like you can go on Dental Town and you see all these posts. There was one thread last month about May is so slow. Let me tell you something. You get all this pile on. It's all about the front office. If the month is looking slow, you put pressure on the front office because it's those calls out, it's the treatment plan acceptance, the actions of the front office team that determine the success of a practice. Now, I'm just going to assume that staff are not going to listen to this podcast, and I'll tell you something that I don't say in front of staff, but I know it's true. The front office person will have a lot to do with the income of the dentist and a lot to do with the car you drive and the house you live in. And you might not think that, but let me tell you, I've seen it. I've seen it over and over again. I've seen practices struggle. They get a new person that's trained and knows how to communicate, and I've seen that production go up 40 and 50%.
More of that after the break, but first, a word from our sponsor. Okay, now that you've realized that your neck hurts, the next part that should frustrate you about your current pair of loops is that there's this wasted space between the bottom of the frame and where it's comfortable to look down. So I want you to look down when you're wearing your loops. So look below the loops, below the frame. And if you look down really far, like as far as you can without moving your head, eventually that's strained, that's uncomfortable. You can't have the loops that far down. You can't hold that for a while. There's this whole zone of comfortable space between the bottom of the frames and where the loops could be placed that's wasted because of your current frame. Q Optics has designed not only a new frame, but also a way of measuring the space of your face. They actually take like a face bow of you and take a picture of it and put it in the computer. There's this little contraption with green dots that you wear on a pair of glasses, and they take a photo from the front and a photo from the side. And they've got some fancy names for it, but essentially they're doing a map of your face, a 3D map of your face, and maximizing the amount of frame that can dip down and they can put loops in. Why wouldn't you maximize that for every single person? Well, it's easy. It's easier to just buy a bunch of preset frames than it is to make custom frames for everybody. So if you're interested in maximizing the real estate that you have available, you can send an email to sales@qoptics.com with the promo code SP16 for $100 off a pair of loops or $300 off of a loop and light combo. It's time for you to stop wasting all that space.
So in the front office, now we've kind of narrowed in on the front office based on what you've said. And where would we start? What specific aspect of the front office would we begin to look?
Phones. You start right off with the gateway to the practice, which is your telephone. So if you're fortunate enough to live in a state where you can record phone calls without the permission of the patient, you'd want to get set up with that or use one of the services. You want to be able to listen into those calls. Okay?
What do you think about outsourcing the phone calls, the incoming new patient phone calls?
I think it's not a good idea.
Why not?
I'm a fan of the doctor having a business and setting up their business. Patients call, and I have called some of these offices that have someone else answering the phone. I haven't had an impressive one yet. I'm sorry. I haven't heard an impressive one yet. I called one recently and I thought, oh my God, guys, we have so much to do with this office. I was on hold and I had two consultants sitting in front of me. You should hear this person that has me on hold. Come to find out it was an outsourced person answering the phone. It was terrible. So I just don't think it's a good thing. And the patients come in and they want to see that person. In dentistry, the most successful practices have something in common. And the thing that they have in common is that the practice has people skills and internal marketing. Now, if you want a practice where you simply process people and the back door is open and you get 50, 60, 90, 100 new patients a month and you don't care if they come back, yeah, let somebody else answer your phone. That's great. If you want to outsource anything, it should be insurance, your billing, your collections. That's the best thing to outsource.
I was just about to ask you about that. I'm really happy you brought that up. Can you talk about insurance outsourcing and what you feel about it?
Well, that's a no-brainer. It's simple. If you need to outsource, If you're at a point where maybe you have an established practice and then someone leaves, or you bought that practice and you're like, I've got to get rid of this girl, one of the girls at the front. I love this one company, Dental Support Specialties out of Ohio, I like them. She's got about 25 employees, and they are highly trained. They've all worked in a dental practice, and they don't work from home. They come to an office. It's very impressive, the skill set of these people. And the thing I like about them is that they're when you hire them and you pay by the hour, if your phone's not ringing, if they're backing up your phones, they're making calls out to schedule patients. So, I'm not really fond of outsourcing, but if you get in that situation, maternity leaves, you let someone go, someone quits, you're backed up, insurance is the easiest thing to do. It doesn't involve patient contact. You've got someone that's verifying your insurance for you. They're posting your payments. They're calling past due insurance claims. It's a no-brainer.
Have you seen an increase in collections rate when somebody does outsource their insurance to an outside agency?
When a practice is suffering with very low collections, it can help. And yes, I've seen that. But thankfully, I'll tell you, our clients collect 97 to 101, 102% of their production every month. So I don't see that. If you have a good financial policy, you're not going to have those collection problems. The insurance aging can be a huge problem, and that's where the outsourcing can help. But if you have someone assigned to these things, they're not going to get behind. The reason that the collections happen and the insurance aging occurs the way it does is because no one's in charge of it. When you put someone in charge of it and they're held accountable and they come to the staff meeting, the monthly staff meeting, and they report to the doctor what they did the previous month, basically. They will come, they bring it to the doctor. Does that make sense?
That makes a whole lot of sense. And I think holding people accountable is something that doesn't maybe come naturally to us, but it's just so important that we do it.
I have seen this over and over again. So they come to the staff meeting. I'm the insurance coordinator. Okay, we start with the front office, the receptionist. Doctor, we had 45 new patients this month, and that was up from 30 from last month. I sent out 45 new patient letters, or she might say I sent out 10 new patient letters. And doctor just heard there were 45 new patients and just writes it down, doesn't interrupt her, just kind of makes a note. She continues with her numbers. Now we move to the scheduler. Doctor, the production was up. It was this and this and this. We were above target by this. The percentage of the schedule filled was 94%. Our broken appointments were down this month. We only had 14 compared to 44 last month. And so they're going through their numbers. Insurance coordinator, she says how many claims she filed, the money collected, and the aging. And the hygienist says what her production was and her average per hour and her 4,000 codes. And you just go around the room and doctor just sits there and makes notes. Then afterwards may ask a question. But any private discussion takes place after the meeting, not in front of everybody. So it's like, doctor, this is what I did for you last month. It's just so awesome.
I really like that.
Yeah, people will hustle so they can say they did a little better than the month before. And then, of course, your systems is something like practice by numbers, which I love. I like it so much I've included in our consulting. The doctor can just look and verify the numbers if they want. But it's the idea of the staff member saying it, bringing it and saying it that's so powerful.
Yeah, based on practice by numbers, their software is incredibly impressive. I'm really happy that you also are on board with them because I've really liked what Rohit is doing with that company.
Oh, I'm just so excited about it. And yeah, I've just decided every client, I'm going to pay for my clients to have it.
So Sandy, I wanted to go back to the systems that we're implementing in the practice that we bought here. So we've addressed the phones and we've kind of talked about holding people accountable. I want you to kind of say, now that we've given some people some duties, we've really spent some time and effort on the phones, where would you say is the next most important place to go to?
Are we still talking about front office? Because I'm a huge fan of patient retention and recall process systems. That's like I love it because there's so many missed opportunities in practice. So for doctors that are buying practices, one of the first things you want to do, and I just love this, I get so excited, it's the best system, is you go in and you find out how many people haven't been into the practice. And you go back, say, 12 months to maybe back 3 years. Okay. So you could start at 7 months and go back 3 years. You could go back with a new practice that you're going into as a new owner. You might go back 5 years. Okay. And you just pull a list, last visit date. That's the key report you're looking for. Last visit date. So here we are, we're in June. So you could actually say, okay, let's go back from November 1st, and we'll go back from 2013 all the way to November 1st, 2016. Okay, that would be a good place to go.
Okay.
Or you could go and now you pull a report. Those are last visit dates. You are going to be shocked. Some practices have as many as 2,000 people on there, but the average is about 1,200. And all those people need a dentist. They know where the practice is. They've been there. They know the experience. And many, many, many of them consider that office to be their dentist.
What kind of retention rate or conversion rate would you get on those calls typically?
Well, it's not calls. Okay. You don't want the calls. There's a whole other reason for that. But basically what I would do is communicate. Okay, you ready for it?
I'm ready.
I'm not by email, because only 28% of emails are ever opened, if you do research on that, by snail mail. And the beauty of it is you wouldn't send it just one mailing. Any marketing campaign is usually several mailings. So you'd want to do at least 2 or 3 mailings to the same group of people. And what you're doing is whenever you pull this report from your computer software, you're using the special date range. So every time you pull a report, use that same date range and you'll be able to see how it's doing. But typically, to answer your question, we get back 9 to 19% of the people without a phone call.
Wow.
Now, forget about that point. Here's the most important thing. You're cleaning out your files. You're finding out who died, who moved, who's never coming back. Whenever you buy the practice, one of the major things you're buying is the list of patients, right? It's the patient pool. So now by doing this project, you are cleaning everything up. You want to make sure when you're looking at practices, this is a really good report if you're looking at practices to look at, to decide the potential of a practice maybe. It's huge if you have 1,000 or 2,000 people on this list, right? So also one thing that we see a lot that shouldn't happen is we see staff inactivate patients too soon. Okay. If it's 12 months and they haven't called or come in, the staff will say, oh, well, we'll just inactivate this. Well, no, don't do it. I know even myself, I'm going to say this, okay? Everybody knows I live, eat, breathe dentistry, right? It's all about dentistry with me. And I went over a year without a cleaning, okay? So, and I still consider my dentist my dentist. So this is what I say all the time. If they have blood flowing through their veins, if they did not call and say they're never coming back, or you don't know that they moved out of town, they're still patients. They're a prospect for your chair. They need a dentist.
I'm really happy you're mentioning this to our listeners. People ask me what's my plan when I buy the practice that I'm looking at, and people jump to external marketing, but I really feel like with an acquisition, there's so much internal opportunities.
Exactly.
And so when you're contacting these people, 2 things I have a question about. Would you mention the transition in that form of communication, that there's a new doctor here and they would like to see you and all that?
I would have already sent some sort of letter out.
Okay, so then they would already
Yeah.
know that there's a new doctor, so then they wouldn't be confused if they get their letter, they call, and then they don't see the old doctor.
Right, right. And sometimes, I mean, they still need a dentist. So you could mention it, but I think I wouldn't go into that. I'd send the letter, okay, that's send the letter, then that talks about the transition, typically from the senior doc that's leaving or has already left that sold the practice. Now you're doing the reactivation project, and you send out the cards from the practice and send them 2 or 3 times, once a month for 2 or 3 months to the same group of people, unless you found out they moved or died or they're never coming back. There's something very important about the cards. Okay, it's one of my best kept secrets.
Okay.
You ready for it? Okay, this is really important because I've never heard of another consultant recommending this, or I've never even seen it. On every card that you send for recall, you need to put return service requested on the card under your address, your return address. Because if the card goes out to a patient that moved across town or moved to Hawaii, you're going to get the new address now, and your staff don't have to spend countless hours trying to find people.
I mean, who would have think that?
Well, I learned it from doing it. So
my other question about these cards is, I feel like if you were to send it to your whole list, let's just say you have 1,500 people on there, are you going to get an onslaught of calls, right away?
That's a great question. People ask me that all the time. And sometimes they don't follow our recipe because they're thinking, oh, we're going to send 1,500 cards. What are we going to do? Well, first of all, just do it. Do the project, because not everybody's going to call that day. What's going to happen is you're going to get a ton of them back on your first mailing because people have moved or died, right? You're going to get a ton of them back. You may get some call and say that they have moved out of town or they're never coming to that dentist again. Okay. It's going to clean it up. If you have 1,000, you're probably going to knock off 250 or 300 just from the first mailing.
And how many on the first mailing would you predict in your experience of those 1,000 would call to schedule an appointment? My worry was the schedule. I don't want to get too backed up.
I know exactly what you were thinking. But no, that's not going to happen. I don't know the percentage, to be honest with you, because that's mainly the cleanup mailing. That's most will call you at the second mailing if it's within 30 days of the first mailing. So it's like they have to see it twice. It's just something else. It's, they don't get it. They're already past due, right? There's been attempts, I hope, and I'm saying that, but many, many times we see recall systems non-existent in practices. So maybe they haven't gotten a card. Maybe they got an email with a bunch of other spam.
I totally believe that. I remember listening to a marketing firm talking about direct mail, and they're talking like 2.3 impressions before a patient calls on average. So, the second one, I would expect it to have the highest volume. Would you mail all of them in 30 days from each other?
Yep. Don't change my recipe. I've been doing this for 18 years, this one particular reactivation project in every part of the country, and it works.
So are you just constantly sending letters every 30 days until you don't have a list?
No. I would do it 3 times.
Okay.
That would be my maximum, would be 3 times. And at the end of the third mailing, when 30 days after the third mailing, when you pull that report, it should be 9 to 19% smaller, or those people have come in, I should say. Those people have come in. I was lecturing at the Academy of Dental Office Managers, American Association of Dental Office Managers. Somebody raised their hand and said, Sandy, we did that, your project, and we got back 30%. And that was the highest I'd ever heard. And then one girl in a lecture once, she said, well, I think we only got 8% back. But then I started asking her what they did, and they were ones that didn't keep up with the mailings. So there's always a reason if it doesn't come out right. That's why I call it a recipe. You got to follow the recipe to get consistent results.
So when your clients do the reactivation project, they do the 3 mailings, and then how long do they wait before they start it up again?
Every January. After the first mailing, it should be, but there's certain months that's important. So the best months to start the project are January, February, March, or August or September. Those are the best months to start the project. Once you do the project, then just do it every January for the life of your practice. If you started it in August, don't do it again in January. Wait till the following January.
Okay, so for me, I'd be acquiring a practice in the summertime, so then I would be looking at that first August probably would be when I would start it.
That's right. And then I would skip the next January and then continue the following January. You just do it every January, and it's part of your recall process. You see, people tend to go on vacation and they have graduations and weddings and all these things, and we just found the best responses were during those months if they were started in those months.
Our mission at Shared Practices is to navigate the path to successful practice ownership. As this is something that we constantly trying to improve, we ask for feedback from people who have already become practice owners. Feedback that we've been getting is that our podcast does not allow listeners to get enough information in an organized way where they can actually apply it to their situation as they're looking to buy a practice. I think this is the biggest area where our podcast falls short. We try our best to infuse the podcast with information, but ultimately the medium at which it is consumed does not always allow us to get exactly what we want for it. This is why we created the Ownership Accelerator. We saw a need for an in-depth and comprehensive course to cover both practice acquisitions and journey into practice ownership. It is our way of fixing all the things that we wish we could accomplish with our podcast, but are not able to. That being said, we have finally released the Ownership Accelerator. The Ownership Accelerator is an online course that takes you step by step through the entire process of buying a dental practice. The idea behind the course was based on our experiences helping people find practices, analyze deals, and ultimately their experiences closing. We saw the things that made some buyers successful and other ones not as successful. We saw challenges they face and ways to stack their cards in their favor to find a great practice. We teamed up with Paul Goodman, who has tons of experience working with both buyers and sellers. We also enlisted the help of professionals David Alvey, Brian Pender, and Rob Montgomery. The result was a comprehensive online course about buying a dental practice that consists of 12 sections, more than 80 10 to 12 minute videos, and the entire course comes out to be about 15 hours long. Included in the course is a 250-page course manual that gets shipped to you to help you go through the course. Also included, we have spreadsheets, worksheets, and checklists to keep you on track as you go through the process of buying a dental practice. The ultimate goal of the course is to help you find the right practice to buy, not just any practice, but the right practice for you. We strongly believe that the right practice will maximize your income and career satisfaction. Ask yourself what your career would look like if you bought a practice that maximized your income and career satisfaction. Visit ownership.sharedpractices.com for more information. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Start your career off on the right foot and take the Ownership Accelerator today. I'm totally with you on the reactivation and then the retention rate of your patients. I have a question about it though. Something that kind of worries me, and Graham Dursley has brought it up on Dental Town, is building a prophy palace, so he calls it, where you just have such a great retention rate where, you know, you have so many POEs and checks to be doing that it interferes with your ability to be productive on the restorative side. What is your response to somebody who would say that?
Well, that is something that I've been talking about for years. Graham was actually my client too.
I did know that too.
Yeah, he's awesome. He is awesome. So, and I talk a lot about prophy palaces, and so that's a whole nother topic. I mean, you've got to have your systems in place in that way, of course. So, you know, I mean, a prophy palace, all that really is patients coming in and the hygienist not diagnosing perio, right?
Oh, okay, so you're saying it from the regard of do you have a lot of undiagnosed and not completed work? And that's why you're considering it a prophy palace.
A prophy palace is whenever you pull a report from your computer for all, by code, for everything a hygienist would do. And she's got 98% of her procedures are prophies.
Okay, well then let me just rephrase my question then, because I think we got miscommunicated on the prophy palace term. I did a little boot camp with Practice by Numbers, and looking at their production per active patient versus their production per new patient, the numbers is like 6 times more for a new patient than it is for an active patient. So isn't there a point in a practice's life where the retention isn't as important because of the production per the existing patient is much less than the production for the new patient?
I don't know about that. I think that new patients are always important. Let me say that again. I'm not really following you. I mean, retention's always important. If
I,
you don't have retention, then you're always looking for new patients, right?
I guess what I'm saying is, can you reach a size, or is there a size where if you're have so many hygienists to have to check, then it's taking you away from more production. So if you were to have a lower
Ah,
retention rate, then you could actually be more productive because you'd be seeing more of your time on new patients.
I don't think that one. I know too many models that wouldn't even apply to.
Okay, I'm happy.
I
I
don't.
just that's something that was
It,
bothering me. So
that's what I would call a fixed idea. It's like you can get really lost in those numbers as well too. So I know doctors. In fact, the doctor that I managed his practice, the founder of our company, Dr. Westerman, for example, at he's 80 years old now, by the way, and he sold his practice 5 years ago. At that point, doing 3 million solo, checking 4 hygienists at age 75, and they were only doing 28% of his total office production.
oh, okay. Yeah, so then definitely not valid point here.
And I know a lot of people that we've worked with that would never fall into that.
Okay, so I do want to close then on this idea of you have this analogy that I really liked on Dentaltown. You talk about this beach ball analogy. So whenever you implement systems, you have this beach ball analogy that kind of explains how a system should be designed to be effective. Can you kind of go over that with our listeners?
Sure, I love that too because it really makes a lot of sense. It's like people say, Sandy, why systems? Like, what's the big deal? And so I like to explain. Well, let's just say that we are in a circle. Maybe you and your team, you're all in a circle, and you take a big beach ball. Could be any kind of it could be a stapler, actually. It could be anything, and you throw it to one another. Okay, so now as it's going from one person to the next, you see the system working in the practice. It's flowing from one person to the next. Everything's great. Doctor's smiling. It's all good, and then someone decides not to catch it, and now everyone can see who dropped the ball. Now, that only works if you have good systems. Not every system's good. I mean, we hear about some really weird things out there. So it's got to be, a system. How do you know a good system? Good systems connect to one another. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite is like for broken appointments, because that's another passion of mine. It keeps me up at night, actually. But it's so easy to control broken appointments. And so what happens in a practice when you have more than one person, you have a couple of staff, one person's making the appointments, which is your scheduler, and then somebody else is in charge of finance, like I described earlier. And so the financial person is responsible for making sure that everyone on the schedule can afford to come in and that they don't have past due balances and that kind of thing. So a good system to make sure that that was done is the scheduler, before she confirms, looks to make sure that that accounts receivable or financial coordinator person in fact did make those financial arrangements, and they're signed and in the computer. That's a system as part of confirmation. How could you confirm an appointment for a root canal, and here's another patient needing a crown and another one needing 2 crowns without knowing that finances were done? Okay, does that make sense? So that's part of the confirmation.
So then you would have the scheduler check the financial coordinator to make sure that all the accounts are up to date before they call to confirm their appointment. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's right. That's part of the cycle of confirmation. So she's not asking the girl. She's not saying, did you call everybody? Does everybody? No, she's verifying it. That's a good system. And she's like, wait a minute, Susie. What about Mr. Jones coming in for this root canal? Look, he's got a past due balance of $600 from last time. We don't have a financial arrangement on him, because the scheduler knows, she knows the value of that time, and she knows that it's up to her to keep it filled. See, that's a good system.
So if I understand you correctly, then what you're saying is that if staff members' duties are such that they intertwine a little bit, where they can hold each other accountable, then you can determine where there's a flaw in the system.
Yep.
And can you give us another common area where there may be breakdowns in systems and how that beach ball analogy can play into that?
Well, it could be as simple as a new patient calling in and not enough information. Maybe it's an emergency patient and they go through this long explanation of what's going on. And the person answering the phone doesn't get enough information. So now the patient has to come in and repeat everything again. That's a huge problem. So there are a lot of little things like that that can take place. And the systems link it together. So whenever in that situation, you should get all the information, write it down, enter it in the computer, make sure that you're using a route slip. Everybody should print a route slip from their computer. See, I come from the days, that's another system that's very important. I come from the days where we didn't have route slips because we had physical appointment books, right? Or we started scheduling on a computer in the late 90s, which actually 1989 is when we started scheduling on a computer. That was early. Not many people were doing that then. But we had the charts in front of us, right? So you didn't need route slips. Route slips were created by software companies because we didn't have charts anymore.
Can you briefly describe what a route slip is for our listeners?
A route slip is printed from your computer software, and it is one of the most valuable tools you can use. And you can set it up to give you the patient's contact information, their insurance information. It shows the status of their account, if they're past due, how many days past due. Their treatment plan is on there. It'll also show their next appointments, their recall status, their family members' recall status. I love that. The outstanding insurance benefits, but it's a tool that's used for the staff and the doctor to communicate with each other while the patient's there.
So would you print it out for patients coming in that day?
We always, a lot of practices aren't using it correctly. What should happen is your financial person should print them out the day before at 3:00. That's our recipe. 3:00 the day before, the financial coordinator prints out the route slips for everyone coming in the following day. She goes through every one of them. She looks for credit criminals, premeditated fraud. She looks for people that's going to screw up the schedule. Who breaks appointments? People with past due accounts. So she'll call them and she'll say, oh, how did this person get on the schedule? And she'll call and get that financial arrangement handled. If the person says, I'm bringing a check, she puts a red sticker on it. That means money, emergency tied to money. Or she'll make a note about it. New insurance. This is how they communicate. It's like some of the most productive practices. I'm talking, when I say productive, I'm talking about I'm impressed at 2.5 million solo, 3 million. That impresses me. I can go in these practices and you can hear a pin drop. It's like so quiet because people know what's expected of them. And this route slip is very key. Staff aren't having to buzz each other on the intercom and ask questions. People know the systems. They know what it all means. And the route slip helps communicate all of that.
So let me just kind of real quick, you brought up something that interested me. So you won't schedule a patient that has a past due balance until they've paid that balance?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's very interesting to see broken appointments. Like one thing, I don't know if you know this about me, but every week I study about 60 or 70 broken appointments in practices, and I love doing it. I got one just recently, Monday. Here it comes across the fax machine. I'm walking by. It was meant for one of our consultants, and I looked over there, and there are all the people that broke the appointment in this practice that's new on our program. And you know what it said? It had the patient's name, previous broken appointments, 9, then 8, then a 7, then a 9. Okay, so then my eye moves across, past due balances. That's who breaks appointments. If the financial's not handled, they don't come. I mean handled, where they've signed a financial arrangement, made a deposit. I mean, it's so easy. It's really easy whenever you have a plan.
So we kind of talked about phones, and then we talked about retention. Would you look at that as one of the areas you would focus on next, or where else would you have focused on next?
Well, retention, making sure that what I talked about, the reactivation project, getting the patient contact information up to date. Then I'm going to look at open time. I think that would be really interesting. Open time, time never filled, those missed opportunities at the front. Because again, this is the heart of your practice, but it's generally where dentists put very little attention. So this is where it all starts. So what's your incomplete treatment? What does an incomplete treatment look like? And then I would start keeping a statistic on treatment plans presented and accepted, and I would get a percentage of acceptance. So you know where you need work. You keep track of who presented what, who's the most successful at presenting treatment plans. It's all about finding the missed opportunities and turning those around.
Okay, and so you would then look at things that influence case acceptance.
Absolutely.
And we are kind of running out of time, so I wish I could have you, go into depth on more. I'm really enjoying this. But if you had to talk about, so we talked about the phones, we talked about retention, we talked about case acceptance. Are there any others that you just kind of broad topics that come to mind as things that should be focused on early?
Well, you're looking at your percentage of time filled.
Are you talking about schedule time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And that target is 94% for each provider. And if it's 100%, great. But if you look at it, it's like 1 or 2 10-minute units, and that'll bring it down to 94%. You need to have a production target. You need to start with a production target. Any existing providers, like a hygienist that's been there, what you want to do is find out what she's averaging a day or he is averaging a day in production, and look at their pay and make sure that their target aligns with their pay. So let's say that their average production is $1,400 a day. Well, then what I would do is look at their compensation, their total compensation and cost of the practice. And you would want to make sure that that she's producing 3 times that.
Okay. And Sandy, I'm going to be a little selfish here. One of my favorite topics is same-day dentistry. I know that I've read your comments on threads about same-day dentistry. So if same-day dentistry was something I'm interested in, how do people do more same-day dentistry?
It's all about capacity. You've got to have the chairs and the staff. You've got to be able to do it. I like same-day dentistry. I think it just is a no-brainer, especially if you have somebody in your office that is a compulsive appointment breaker, and you can get the financials handled and you can go ahead and get that dentistry done that day. It just makes sense. So I think it is a matter of communication and acceptance with the staff and having enough people.
So you would recommend, I know you talk about Dr. Westerman being one staff member overstaffed on the clinical side. Do you think if somebody were to do that with the hope of doing more same-day dentistry, that would more than pay for itself?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. The opportunities are there, and if you utilize your people, that's what you have to do. And remember, you don't just go start your day and forget you've got this other person with another chair over there. And you start to see the opportunities once you start implementing it. It's just right there in front of you.
So then you're saying the big things are having an extra chair, having an extra person or extra staff capacity, and then having the communication necessary to get it done efficiently.
Yes, there's no need to put people off 2 and 3 weeks for treatment. It's just no need unless you're limited in space. And look, if you're looking for a practice, I mean, and it has 3 chairs, that just wouldn't be attractive. I don't think you can ever grow. And if you're a go-getter and you want to make money and you want to have a nice career where you can afford things for your family and pay off those student loans, you need at least 5 chairs. 6 is the perfect.
What about for 2 doctors?
You're going to need more like 8 if you want to grow. If you want to grow.
I totally with you. My wife and I are looking. My wife's a dental student with me, and we're both looking at a practice, and it has 8 operatories. So I mean it was one big thing I was thinking about, because same-day dentistry is something that is near and dear to my heart, and I hope to do a lot of it.
A lot of that, your success is going to have to do with where you put that practice, and also a lot of people. Now, I just want to say one thing about having the chairs, because I do know some people with 5 chairs that have 2 doctors, but they don't work the same days. So the doctors each want to work 2.5 days, so that works out great.
Yeah, another great idea. Sandy, I can't thank you enough for hopping on with me. You shared so much valuable information for our listeners, about staff and everything. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. Yeah, we'll have to do it again.
I would love that. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, that was awesome. Sandy, as always, delivers. I think you could line up a series of. Does she have her own podcast right now? Is she actively podcasting at this moment?
I don't know if she's actively podcasting, but I know that she has one. I don't know the frequency in which she publishes on there.
But she's been on so many podcasts, and just everything she puts out on Dentaltown, on her podcast has been extremely valuable. So for you, what was the biggest takeaway from this interview?
Well, I think, I have I guess, hindsight or foresight in that I've seen the next 3 interviews that are going to be released on the podcast. And so for me, it was, you'll find that she was very willing to make changes. And, she was willing to, change a staff member or go in and start, she talked about changing things almost immediately because, you have fresh ownership. It's a time to make some changes. And I think that's something you won't see in future episodes. Well,
and we're going to be getting into fee-for-service acquisitions and transitions. So this would be kind of like the typical Sandy Pardue is, and she'd probably do this even for a fee-for-service. Maybe she'd mix it up. But if you're walking into a practice that's insurance-driven, being a little more aggressive up front is less likely to scare away a large portion of your patient base versus you'll kind of hear what our next doctors have done. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a great comparison and contrast of like, okay, there's more than one way to do this. And this is what Sandy would do. She'd come in and make some changes that needed to be changed.
Exactly. And the thing is, she talked about like, I think the thing that always scares me going into an acquisition is the hygienist, making sure you get along with them. And the interview, she's like, yeah, I mean, no staff member is worth, no position is not replaceable in her mind going into an acquisition. I think that's not a common sentiment among maybe doctors who don't have as much confidence as she does, given she has consulted a large number of doctors in a lot of practices. So, I think that's something that we're always afraid to do is let go of a team member if they're not a good fit.
Well, and I think hiring is one of her core competences. And so, and this is something we want to hit in a future season, and we will definitely have Sandy back on. But if you're not confident in hiring, then yeah, you're going to let these people hold you hostage. But if you have the ability to say, you know what, okay, I know what I want in my practice, and I'm willing to go through 50 applicants to get there, or whatever it ends up being, 5, 10, you're going to know that it's worth the pain to get the right people in that spot.
Absolutely. And I think, if there's one thing to take away from this episode, it will become more apparent in future weeks, but it's the fact that the front desk, I think, was one area she really wanted to focus on coming in. And the second thing is, it's a good time to maybe do some things that maybe need to be done right when the practice is being purchased and there's a change in ownership within reason, I think. But I really like the perspective that she provided. And in future episodes, I want you to compare it back to this one because I think it's going to be quite different.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the fee-for-service transition, that's something that's very, we'll see in the coming weeks. So I won't go on and on about it, but I'm really excited about these upcoming interviews. So hopefully you guys will tune in next week. Thank you, George. This has been an awesome episode, and we'll talk to you guys next time on the Shared Practices podcast.